At 6:12 on Thanksgiving evening, my parents handed velvet gift boxes to every grandchild at the table except my daughter. Nobody looked surprised, not even my husband. Then my mother slid a white envelope across the table, containing documents my brother wasn't supposed to see yet. 10 minutes later, he left the dining room and called his attorney in a panic. That should have been the moment I understood the family I kept defending had already rewritten us out of it. But the worst part wasn't the missing gift. It was realizing my daughter had already learned how to smile through humiliation before she was old enough to name it. At 6:12 on Thanksgiving evening, my mother stood beside the dining table, holding velvet gift boxes like ceremonial offerings. Candlelight reflected against crystal glasses while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers somewhere inside the estate. My father carved turkey at the head of the table with the same careful precision he used during board dinners, barely looking at anyone directly. Around him, my nieces and nephews straightened in their chairs with rehearsed excitement. "One for Ava," my mother said warmly, sliding a deep green box across the linen tablecloth. "A future surgeon deserves something memorable." Ava smiled immediately. Cameras appeared. Compliments followed. Then came Ethan's gift, then Claire's, then Benjamin's. Each child received praise alongside the box: academic awards, piano recitals, debate championships. My mother narrated their futures like she was introducing scholarship finalists instead of grandchildren. Beside me, Lily folded her hands carefully in her lap. She was only 11, but she had already learned how to make disappointment look quiet. I noticed the exact moment she realized no box remained beside my mother's plate. The room changed after that, not loudly, not dramatically. Conversations simply became too polished. My sister Amanda reached for her wine glass without looking at Lily once. "Mom believes gifts should reflect investment," she said casually. Nobody corrected her. My father continued carving turkey. The chandelier above us hummed softly while Lily stared down at the silverware, arranged beside her untouched plate. I could almost feel her trying to calculate what she had done wrong. Then my mother reached beneath her chair and placed a thin, white envelope in front of me instead. "This one is yours, Elena." Her voice sounded controlled in the way people sound when they've rehearsed something privately. I opened the flap slowly. Inside sat a property file stamped with the crest of our family trust. Beneath the legal reference number, I recognized my grandmother's handwriting immediately. Even after 12 years, the sharp slant of her penmanship still carried the same quiet authority. Across the table, Daniel stopped moving. His smile disappeared so quickly it almost looked painful. "What is that?" Amanda asked. Daniel interrupted before I could answer. "Probably outdated paperwork," he said too fast. Then he stood, muttered something about a phone call, and walked toward the back patio with his hand already reaching for his cell phone. Through the dining room windows, I watched him press the phone tightly against his ear. Whatever was inside that envelope, my brother had seen it before. For the first time all evening, my mother said nothing while Daniel spoke. She simply lifted her wineglass and watched me with an expression I could not read then, though later I would understand it. By 10:43 that night, the estate had gone quiet except for the grandfather clock outside the library and the distant clatter of dishes being cleaned downstairs. Lily had fallen asleep in the guest room after pretending the drive home would have been too long anyway. I sat alone beneath the yellow reading lamp in my childhood bedroom with the white envelope spread open across my lap. At first glance, the documents looked routine: trust amendments, property schedules, tax language dense enough to discourage questions. But beneath the newest pages, I found older paperwork folded carefully underneath the staples. My grandmother's handwritten annotations ran along the margins in dark blue ink. "Protect Elena's branch equally. Review if ownership shifts disproportionately. Do not consolidate voting authority under one household." I read the lines 3 times before realizing my hands had gone cold. The newer amendments contradicted nearly all of it. Somewhere over the years, the estate structure had quietly changed direction. Suddenly, dozens of small memories rearranged themselves into something uglier. The family ski trips Lily and I somehow always heard about afterward. Daniel's children appearing in professionally framed school portraits lining the upstairs hallway while Lily's photos stayed missing. Birthday dinners moved without telling us. My mother once laughing that Daniel's son would actually understand legacy management someday. Even the seating at holidays had shifted gradually until Daniel's family occupied the center of every table, while we drifted toward corners. I used to call those things oversights because acknowledging and felt unbearable. Around 11, Daniel knocked once before entering my room without waiting. "You're making too much of this," he said quietly. "Mom didn't mean anything by the gifts." I stared at him. "Lily was the only child excluded. She's sensitive because you are." The sentence landed with frightening familiarity, like something practiced across years rather than spoken impulsively. Then he noticed the papers beside me. For 1 second, genuine panic crossed his face before disappearing again. "Those drafts are outdated," he said quickly. "You shouldn't dig through legal paperwork you don't understand." After he left, I sat awake listening to pipes hum behind the walls of the old house. Every room suddenly felt divided between 2 versions of our family. The polished public version displayed downstairs, in photographs and holiday speeches, and the quieter one hidden beneath revisions, omissions, and careful silences. At exactly 12:07 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. 3 screenshots appeared one after another. Estate transfer projections, internal accounting notes, and a highlighted message that read, "Finalize redistribution before Alina reviews grandmother provisions." I stared at the screen while the house settled around me like something slowly rotting from the inside. The screenshots continued for almost 20 minutes. Spreadsheet fragments, internal accounting notes, half-deleted email chains forwarded from someone inside the estate office. The deeper I scrolled, the less the language sounded like family, and the more it sounded like asset management. One exchange between Daniel and my father carried the subject line, "Year-end consolidation strategy." Daniel wrote, "If Alina remains classified under detached beneficiary status, restructuring stays clean." My father replied 37 minutes later, "Agreed. Simpler long-term. Detached beneficiary." I stared at the phrase until the words stopped feeling real. Somewhere inside those documents, Lily and I had quietly been converted from relatives into complications. Another message appeared underneath. "Need final signatures before tax review window closes." Then one sentence highlighted in yellow. "Lily complicates clean inheritance division." The cruelty of it wasn't loud. That made it worse. Nobody argued about whether Lily mattered emotionally. They discussed her the way attorneys discuss zoning restrictions or disputed property lines. I suddenly remembered my mother insisting Lily's bedroom remained temporary during family visits while Daniel's children had permanent rooms upstairs with framed names on the doors. At the time, I convinced myself it was practical. Looking back now, it felt administrative. The estate had been emotionally reorganizing us for years. Before the paperwork caught up, at 1:14 in the morning, another notification appeared on my phone. This time, it wasn't anonymous. Harold Stein. The name tightened something in my chest immediately. Harold had served as my grandmother's estate attorney for nearly 3 decades. He rarely contacted anyone directly. His message was brief. "Ms. Mercer, I believe certain documents now in your possession require immediate clarification. This matter should remain confidential until we speak. No greeting, no explanation." Below the message sat an address for a private office downtown, and a meeting time, scheduled for the following afternoon. I read the text twice while rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows. Down the hallway, I could hear my parents laughing quietly with Daniel downstairs, as if Thanksgiving had ended normally. For the first time in my life, I realized family damage did not always happen through screaming or visible cruelty. Sometimes it happened through revisions, and signatures, and language careful enough to sound professional while it erased you slowly. I closed the screenshots knowing whatever Harold wanted to reveal would permanently change how I understood my family. Harold Stein's office overlooked the riverfront financial district. Though the windows were so tinted, the city outside looked distant and colorless. When I arrived at 2:03 that afternoon, he was already seated beside a long walnut conference table with several folders arranged in careful stacks. My grandmother trusted Harold because he never wasted words, pretending difficult things were easy. "You resemble her more when you're angry," he said quietly after I sat down. I hadn't realized my expression showed anything at all. Harold opened one of the folders and slid a yellowed document toward me. The paper carried my grandmother's signature dated 19 years earlier. Embedded halfway through the estate structure sat something labeled Protective Equity Continuation Clause. I read the paragraph twice before fully understanding it. If any direct legal error is intentionally diminished, excluded, or structurally displaced through coordinated inheritance manipulation, Harold explained, the clause permits automatic review of all consolidated estate transfers. I looked up slowly. She expected this. Harold folded his glasses carefully. Your grandmother anticipated favoritism long before her health declined. She believed concentrated inheritance power damages families faster than almost anything else. For several seconds, the only sound in the room came from the soft ticking of the brass clock mounted behind his desk. The restructuring Daniel proposed last quarter may have activated the clause unintentionally. Harold continued, particularly if exclusion can be demonstrated through financial or documented behavioral patterns. Behavioral patterns. The phrase immediately pulled Lily's face back into my mind at the Thanksgiving table. The missing gift, the silence afterward, years of subtle positioning disguised as tradition. Harold opened another file containing highlighted transfer requests, accelerated consolidation schedules, and internal estate memorandums signed by Daniel and approved by my father. He moved too quickly, Harold said. The year-end tax restructuring created visibility he likely didn't anticipate, and now, by the time we arrived at the estate on December 23rd, snow had already gathered along the stone driveway in smooth, untouched layers. Through the front windows, the house glowed gold beneath, garland lighting and crystal chandeliers arranged, carefully enough to resemble a luxury hotel advertisement rather than a family Christmas gathering. Inside, everything felt curated. Matching velvet ribbons hung from the staircase. Champagne stations had been positioned beside the fireplace. A photographer moved quietly through the rooms, capturing candid moments nobody was naturally having. My mother kissed Lily's cheek lightly when we entered, but her eyes immediately shifted toward Daniel's children racing through the foyer in coordinated holiday outfits. "There's my beautiful crew," she said warmly. Lily stood beside me holding the small tin of homemade cookies she had spent 2 days decorating herself. Nobody noticed. At dinner, conversations drifted constantly toward inheritance-adjacent topics, disguised as casual family updates, college funds, vacation properties, internship opportunities Daniel's children might someday inherit through family continuity planning. Each sentence carried invisible borders around who belonged inside the future being discussed. Then came the photographs. My mother positioned everyone carefully beside the staircase while the photographer adjusted lighting equipment near the piano. Daniel and his wife stood at the center naturally, their children arranged in front like a holiday catalog. Lily moved quietly toward the space beside her cousins. Before she fully stepped into position, my mother touched her shoulder gently and redirected her half a step outward. "Maybe just there, sweetheart," she said softly. "The spacing works better." The movement looked small enough that most people probably never registered it, but the photographer did. I saw his camera lower slightly afterward, and I saw Lily pretend not to care again. Across the room, Amanda complimented the symmetry of the arrangement, while my father kept adjusting his cufflinks instead of looking directly at anyone. The entire house operated through polished avoidance. Later that evening, while guests moved toward dessert, I stepped into the hallway outside my father's office searching for Lily. That was when I heard Daniel speaking quietly inside the partially open door. Once the property transfers finalize, this all settles itself. Someone answered too softly for me to recognize. Daniel continued, lower this time. She won't fight it if the review stays internal. Review. The word tightened my chest immediately. Before I could hear more, footsteps approached behind me and I moved away toward the dining room where Lily sat alone near the towering Christmas tree, turning the silver pie server over carefully in her hands. My grandmother's pie server, the only object in the house she had been allowed to touch all evening. At exactly 11:18 p.m., while we drove home through falling snow, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I expected another anonymous screenshot. Instead, a single message appeared. I think you should see the photos before your mother requests deletions. Attached beneath the text sat 6 image files still downloading slowly onto my screen. I stayed awake until nearly 3 in the morning, scrolling through the photographs the photographer had sent. There were hundreds of them archived across holidays, birthdays, charity dinners, graduation parties, and summer gatherings stretching back almost 9 years. At first, the images looked ordinary. Then the pattern became impossible to ignore. In nearly every photograph, Daniel's family occupied the visual center automatically. His children stood beside my parents. Their shoulders touched naturally. Their smiles faced directly toward the camera like certainty itself. Meanwhile, Lily and I existed at the edges, sometimes partially cropped, sometimes seated separately, sometimes positioned near exits, corners, or empty spaces where another person should have been standing. One photograph from Easter 6 years earlier showed my mother physically adjusting Lily backward while Daniel's youngest son sat in my father's lap. Another image captured me reaching toward a family table while conversations continued around me. Without acknowledgement, I had attended every event, yet looking through the photographs felt like discovering evidence that we had only been temporary guests. The worst image came from Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Everyone sat gathered beneath a chandelier, smiling toward the camera while an empty chair remained positioned directly beside me, not accidentally empty, deliberately balanced. I stared at it for several minutes before realizing what hurt most wasn't cruelty itself. It was consistency. Exclusion repeated carefully enough over years eventually stops looking emotional and starts looking structural. At 8:42 the following morning, Harold called. "There's been a complication," he said without greeting. I sat upright immediately. Estate auditors uncovered undisclosed borrowing tied to the Northern property holdings. I frowned. Borrowing from who? That remains unclear. Several transfers appear routed through subsidiary entities, connected to Daniel's restructuring proposal. The words settled heavily between us. How bad is it? Harold paused long enough that I already knew the answer before he spoke. Bad enough that concealment may become more damaging than the debt itself. After the call ended, I walked downstairs where Lily sat eating cereal beside the kitchen window, still wearing oversized pajama sleeves over her hands. Morning light touched her face softly while she doodled absent-mindedly on a napkin. She looked up carefully. "Grandma likes them better," she said quietly. Not angry, not crying, just certain. I realized then that children notice emotional geography long before adults admit it exists. For years I had kept trying to preserve peace by minimizing what I felt, But peace built on quiet erasure eventually asks your child to participate in it too. That morning, for the first time, I stopped wanting my parents' approval more than I wanted clarity. At 11:16 a.m., another email arrived from Harold Stein. Emergency trust review notices had officially been filed, and every primary beneficiary had just been notified simultaneously. The family group chat became strangely active after the trust notices went out. My mother sent long messages about misunderstandings and protecting family dignity during stressful administrative reviews. My father avoided specifics completely, replying only with neutral phrases that sounded copied from corporate emails. Daniel reacted differently. He unraveled. At first it happened quietly through late night. Voicemails accidentally left half-finished on my phone. Angry pacing in the background. Drawers slamming. His voice rising sharply at attorneys whose responses I could barely hear. Then came the deleted texts. Need to talk before this gets worse. Followed minutes later by, forget that message. A few hours afterward, another appeared. You are overreacting and Harold is manipulating you. Even through the screen, I could feel panic replacing confidence. Meanwhile, financial rumors spread through the extended family faster than anyone intended. An uncle called asking vague questions about refinancing. Amanda suddenly became unusually friendly, sending Lily expensive gifts she had ignored for years. My mother invited us to dinner twice in the same week, after barely initiating contact all year. The harder they pushed for togetherness, the more artificial it felt. One evening my father called privately while I folded laundry beside the television. You don't need to participate in all this, he said carefully. Families survive these things quietly if people remain reasonable. Reasonable. The same word people use when they expect silence dressed as maturity. Did you know about the borrowing? I asked. The pause afterward told me enough. Daniel was trying to protect the estate long term. No, I said softly. He was trying to secure it. My father exhaled heavily, like exhaustion itself might excuse complicity. By then, estate debt had become impossible to conceal completely. Auditors uncovered leveraged property lines tied against future development projections. Daniel never disclosed publicly. Several transactions carried overlapping authorization dates that triggered automatic compliance review. The family wasn't just facing embarrassment anymore. They were facing exposure. Still, my mother continued insisting appearances mattered most. People are watching us, she told me during another strained phone call. For the first time in my life, I answered honestly, they should. After that, silence settled between us so completely I realized she no longer recognized the version of me willing to absorb discomfort quietly for everyone else's convenience. 3 days later, Harold informed us the formal estate review would begin. Monday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, and attendance was no longer optional. The formal estate review began at exactly 9 o'clock Monday morning inside a private conference suite overlooking downtown. The room itself felt intentionally impersonal. Gray carpeting, frosted glass walls, long polished table, bottled water arranged beside legal folders. Nobody touched once the hearing started. Harold sat at the head calmly organizing documents while independent auditors prepared digital displays across 2 mounted screens. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early, wearing the same navy suit he used whenever he needed to appear composed under pressure. My mother kept adjusting the gold bracelet at her wrist while my father avoided eye contact almost entirely. Nobody spoke to me directly. The auditors moved through the evidence methodically without emotional commentary. Hidden borrowing against undeclared estate holdings. Consolidation requests filed before beneficiary disclosures completed. Altered scheduling summaries that shifted, projected inheritance percentages quietly. Over multiple years, every explanation Daniel offered sounded thinner than the one before it. These were temporary strategies. Tax optimization requires flexibility. The communications are being taken out of context. Then Harold introduced the archived messages, detached beneficiary classifications, transfer acceleration plans. Lily complicates clean inheritance division. For the first time, even my mother lost composure visibly. That phrase sounds harsher, isolated like this, she said quickly. Nobody meant emotional harm, but intent no longer mattered as much as pattern. The room had already begun recognizing structure. Then Harold nodded once toward the projection screen. Please continue with visual review documentation. The photographs appeared one after another in complete silence. Christmas portraits, Thanksgiving tables, birthday dinners, charity galas. In every image, Daniel's family occupied the emotional center, while Lily and I drifted progressively outward, like people being edited slowly from their own history. One photo showed my mother repositioning, Lily physically outside the immediate portrait line, beneath Christmas lights still glowing warmly above everyone else. Another displayed the empty chair beside me at Thanksgiving. Another captured Daniel whispering beside my father while I sat isolated 3 seats away during my grandmother's final Easter dinner. No single image looked catastrophic alone. Together, they became undeniable. I watched my father's expression collapse first, not dramatically, quietly, like a man finally seeing something he had spent years refusing to name. Nobody defended the photographs, because nobody could. Harold folded his hands carefully before speaking again. Based on documented behavioral exclusion, concealed financial restructuring, and coordinated inheritance manipulation, the protective equity continuation clause is hereby activated. The sentence landed with terrifying finality. Daniel immediately began objecting, but his voice sounded distant now, almost irrelevant against the procedural calm filling the room. The review board froze, all pending transfer authority effective immediately. Inheritance restructuring halted. Property leverage investigations expanded. And for the first time in years, Daniel no longer controlled where the family future moved next. Weeks later, after everything officially fractured apart, I drove back to the estate alone beneath a sky, the color of cold steel, and wondered whether the house would recognize me without all the performance inside. The holidays ended without resolution speeches or dramatic reconciliations. Everything fractured quietly instead. Daniel's restructuring collapsed within 3 weeks after the review. Froze transfer authority permanently, pending extended investigation. Development lenders withdrew support. Almost immediately once the estate borrowing became visible publicly, 2 planned property acquisitions disappeared before January ended. For the first time in his life, Daniel stopped speaking about legacy entirely. My parents retreated into controlled silence afterward. Invitations slowed. Certain relatives stopped returning their calls. Conversations at family gatherings became cautious and strangely formal. As if everyone suddenly understood how much manipulation had existed beneath years of polished traditions. Nobody accused them openly. That almost made it worse. One afternoon, my cousin Rachel sent me a message I reread several times. I noticed the favoritism years ago. I just didn't know how to say it without becoming the next problem. After that, more messages arrived quietly from relatives who had watched things happen for years while convincing themselves it wasn't intentional enough to challenge. They remembered Lily being left out of matching holiday pajamas, birthday dinners, changing dates without telling us, my mother introducing Daniel's children as the future of the family. At charity events while Lily stood nearby pretending not to hear. The hardest part wasn't discovering people noticed. It was realizing how long everyone stayed comfortable anyway. Meanwhile, Lily changed slowly once the pressure disappeared. She stopped asking why Grandma forgot certain things. She stopped studying rooms carefully before speaking. One evening while we baked cookies together, she laughed loudly enough that I realized I hadn't heard that sound from her in months. Children bloom quickly once they stop preparing for rejection. In February, I visited the estate briefly to collect several remaining boxers from storage. The house felt enormous without holiday. Lighting and rehearsed, warmth covering its emptiness. Portraits still lined the hallway. But now they looked less like family memories and more like evidence from a life nobody fully survived intact. The dining room chairs remained stacked along one wall after a cancelled fundraiser. One chair stood separated slightly from the others. I stared at it longer than I expected, not because it reminded me of exclusion anymore, because it no longer hurt the same way. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a message from Harold Stein. The final succession documents are ready for review. For several seconds, I sat motionless in the quiet driveway, knowing whatever waited inside those papers would decide whether I remained connected to the estate at all. Harold waited until the rain stopped before handing me the final succession folder. We sat across from each other in his office while late afternoon. Sunlight moved slowly across the dark wood shelves behind him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The last few months had exhausted everyone involved, so thoroughly that silence now felt more respectful than reassurance. The clause transferred protected voting interest authority to you upon activation, Harold said finally. I opened the folder carefully. Page after page outlined the authority now sitting legally in my hands. I could force liquidation of several estate assets, restructure ownership percentages entirely, sell my interest permanently, restore equal beneficiary access, or walk away from the estate structure altogether. For years, I thought power looked loud. I thought it arrived through speeches, control, or visible dominance. Instead, it arrived quietly inside legal paper and difficult choices. What would your grandmother have wanted? I asked. Harold almost smiled. She wanted fairness, he said, not revenge. There's a difference most families never learn. Months later, on an unusually warm evening in early spring, Lily and I sat together inside a small restaurant overlooking the harbor. The windows stood partially open, letting cool air drift softly through the room, while distant lights reflected against the water outside. No family speeches, no performance, no careful seating arrangements, just peace quiet enough to hear silverware touching plates nearby. Lily laughed while explaining a school project involving solar systems and cardboard, planets balanced badly with too much glue. I listened without checking my phone once. At some point during dessert, I noticed the empty chair beside our table. The sight startled me briefly. For years, empty chairs had meant exclusion, distance, the visible outline of where belonging should have existed but didn't. This one felt different, not lonely, intentional. A space nobody needed to earn anymore. My phone buzzed once against the table. Daniel. The message preview appeared only partially across the screen. We should talk. I silenced the phone before reading the rest. Then I reached into my purse and touched the cool silver edge of my grandmother. SPI server resting carefully inside, beside my wallet and keys. Harold had returned it after the estate review finalized. Explaining my grandmother specifically requested it remain with the person most likely to understand what family is supposed to protect. Outside, harbor lights shimmered softly across the dark water while Lily continued talking beside me without fear of interruption or dismissal. For the first time in years, I realized peace was not the absence of conflict. It was the absence of needing permission to belong. And beside us, the empty chair remained exactly where it was, no longer waiting for someone to fill it.